The Resident Evil series has come a long way since its inception, all the way back 25 years ago, where it arguably created the survival horror genre. The series has seen many ups and downs over the years, with a few mixed entries that have split fans. Capcom, you could say, rebooted the series to a more horror focus in 2017 with Resident Evil Biohazard, a new dark first-person take on the series that has won many fans over. Ever since then, we've seen two quality remakes in both Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, but now it's time for a whole new entry in the franchise with Resident Evil Village. Let's see how they did, shall we? Continuing on with the story arc that first started with Resident Evil 7, this sees the return of Ethan Winters and his wife Mia. The couple seem relatively happy now as they even have a kid, but obviously things don't stay happy for that long, as Chris Redfield bursts into the house, kills Mia and kidnaps Ethan and his daughter. When Ethan awakes, he finds himself in a mysterious village packed with werewolf creatures as he searches desperately for his daughter. During the game's adventure, you'll come up against all manner of characters and horrid creatures. One of the highlights has to be the heavily advertised Lady Dimitrescu, the incredibly tall lady of the House of Dimitrescu that stalks you through her house. Ethan has to journey through this village and defeat many gruesome creatures that stand in his way to ultimately find his daughter and get out of this nightmare. I actually really enjoyed the story myself. The opening was perfectly done, building up loads of tension, and whilst the game does go a bit over the top around halfway through, it still remains a very fun, odd and enjoyable Resident Evil tale. As for the gameplay now, and Village follows the same first-person style of gameplay that was first introduced in Resident Evil 7, but this time it feels greatly improved on. Set in the village, it feels a little bit like a semi-open world as you can explore the village, its outhouses and the various domains of the enemies you have to face. I actually really like this approach. There's a little hint of Metroidvania here as you can come back to areas you previously visited to get items you might have missed due to not having the right items. The village itself is moderately sized but feels incredibly eerie with its snow-covered areas and haunting sounds. You'll be returning to the village quite regularly, but between these visits you'll be entering the domain of the many different leading villains. Most noticeably is the, as said, heavily advertised Lady Dimitrescu, whose castle you'll have to fight your way through as well as defeating her daughters. Castle Dimitrescu feels very typical Resident Evil environment. As you explore the castle, you are stalked by the lady of the house in a similar way Mr. X stalked you in Resident Evil 2 and its remake. The really tall lady of the house isn't actually in the game that long, but don't fret as other villains in this game are deliciously dark and suitably evil. A couple of highlights is the doll maker and a creepy doll, as well as Heisenberg, the leader of the werewolf-like creatures that stalk the village. The game constantly keeps you on your toes with creative and horror-filled environments. Many of you will probably like to know, is the game scary? And yeah, I'd say it is. Resident Evil 7 had a couple of moments that were moderately scary, but Village does ramp it up quite a bit. And not with jump scares, but with enemy designs and creepy and unsettling environments. But there is a part in the game that will certainly shock you, and if you're not prepared for it, you will be terrified. It's a fantastic part of the game that will have people talking for years about it, and it'll probably go down as one of the most shocking moments of the series to date. As for the shooting, I'd have to say that it feels top notch here. Shooting enemies and pulling off headshots feels incredibly easier this time, and the game does have more of an action approach while still feeling very scary. There's a decent amount of weaponry in the game and they're all upgradable to allow you to deal more damage and the like. The many different bosses also need mention. After the little bit disappointing Resident Evil 3 remake, Village delivers some of the best bosses in the series. Some of the monstrosities you face wouldn't look far wrong in a Dark Souls or Bloodborne game. They're horrendous looking creatures and a blast to fight. Puzzles also make a return here after a little bit of an absence from a few games, and whilst they're nothing too taxing, they work well and do allow for a nice bit of variety to the gameplay. Also, there's a new merchant here called the Duke. This absolutely huge guy regularly pops up throughout the adventure, offering you help, information, and stuff to buy. But for all this help he gives us, there's also a sense of suspicion about the chap. As for faults with the game, well, there isn't really many. The plot may be a bit over the top for some, but for me, the lichen werewolf enemies are great, but they are a little bit overused in my opinion. And in some areas, the game is so dark, it can be hard to see what is actually going on. On to the length now, and one of the main issues I had with 7 was that it was a little bit too short. Thankfully, Village is a much more lengthier and expansive experience. Reaching the game's conclusion took me just over 10 hours to complete, and that was only getting a few of the collectibles and whatnot, but if you obviously want to get that elusive 100%, then you're talking a good 15 plus hours. Once you've completed the game for the first time, you also gain access to the Mercenaries mode, which is the fan favourite mode that hasn't been seen since Resident Evil 6, and it's great to see it's returning. Even in first person, the Mercenaries is a very enjoyable round-based mode that sees you shooting enemies and building combos. The mode itself is also pretty meaty with several levels as well as rankings for each stages that will certainly add a few more hours to your playtime. As for the technical side of things now, and I'm playing with a PS4 Pro, and I must admit, being a cross-generational game, it looks fantastic on the Pro. We have two modes, one that sees the game running at 4K 30 FPS, and the other one seeing the game running at 1080p whilst running at 60 FPS. I'm playing on a 1080p TV, and the game looks gorgeous with sharp details, textures, and most importantly, it maintains that buttery smooth 60 FPS. The only real fault I have with the graphics is, as I said before, in some areas it can be incredibly dark that it is hard to see what is going on, so I had to mess about with the brightness setting so I could see in dark areas. Conclusion time now, and Resident Evil Village continues Capcom's epic run of brilliant Resident Evil games. With Village, it sees the return of Ethan Winters and continues the story arc that first started with Resident Evil 7 to deliver a very memorable and terrifying game. With a strong narrative, plenty of iconic characters and horrid monsters, it's a full RE package. Exploration and combat is also incredibly strong, and it delivers one of the best adventures in the series to date. So with that, I'm giving Resident Evil Village a 9 out of 10 with the title of brilliant. As always, thank you for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could like and subscribe, that would be awesome. And as always, till next time, happy gaming. Bye.